edition of World Crisis Radio. This is your host, Webster D.G. Tarpley, Ph.D., reporting from Washington, D.C., and because of Thanksgiving weekend, we are recording our program a little bit early, so we will pay, as usual, more attention to the permanent verities and not so much to the ephemeral and contingent. So here we are. We want to get right to the heart of the matter, which is a situation certainly of crisis, as our name correctly implies. The issue that we now face is the ruling elite of the United States on the one hand, and their puppet, one Donald J. Trump, on the other, and where that is headed. Naturally, the fairy tale that Trump was some kind of outsider, that he was a rebel, an insurgent, all of this is essentially a fairy tale, right? It's a chimera. This is somebody who was well known to the finance oligarchs. You'll remember that Trump enjoyed a special relation with the New York branch of the Federal Reserve. You can deduce this by the fact that Trump was getting loans from Citibank in 90, 91, and so forth. They also gave him sweetheart terms so that he was not forced into a humiliating personal bankruptcy and a liquidation of all of his idiotic accoutrement, right? His apartments, his yachts, all this stuff, his airlines with his name plastered on the side. They were very nice to him, as he's their puppet. And later on, of course, he had to shift to Deutsche Bank, but he's kept going there. The people in Wall Street know him, and they knew him. They were filled with contempt until he became a useful tool for maintaining the power of the finance oligarchy by electing a president who would be guaranteed not to disturb any fundamental interest of these bankers, zombie bankers, hedge fund hyenas, finance oligarchs, the entire Wall Street menagerie. Thought, fine, we'll take Trump. Now again, the contempt expressed by some of these people at the top, the ones with cultural or historical pretensions, is a case by itself, but that's really individual, right? The institutions, I think, were looking forward above all to these Republican tax cuts. So if you were watching the United States in 2016, and we were, you'd say, surely there's a bourgeoisie, surely there's a ruling class, surely there's an imperialist finance bourgeoisie in Wall Street in particular, and they don't want some incompetent, some raving dunderhead to become the head of state, head of government. But that's, of course, what happened. And I think the explanation, therefore, has to be that the finance oligarchs wanted this. They wanted Trump, and they wanted this unprecedented tax scam that he has given them, and they wanted other perks, right? They wanted radical deregulation. They probably wanted some fascist judges on the Supreme Court, right? People who thought that the Lochner decisions of the early 20th century were the way to go, right? That you couldn't have any government interference, no regulations, no government interference, pure laissez-faire. So there's the platform. But again, everything depends on understanding that far from being a rebel against Wall Street, Trump is essentially an arriviste. He's a nouveau riche. His nose is pressed against the glass of the Wall Street show window, the social circles that he'd like to be accepted by, but probably never was. There's a whole story about how he courted Rupert Murdoch over many decades, and his problem was only solved when he got the boy wonder Kushner on his side. But now things are changing. And for this point, we want to go back to Watergate. We've got a lot of people opining about Watergate. You've got Maddow. You've got any number of others, right? You've got Jill Wine-Banks with useful contributions on this subject, parallels between now and then. The problem here is that because of the superficiality of somebody like Maddow and somebody who essentially has lived an anti-historical or ahistorical life up to now, they're trying to catch up with what happened in Watergate without understanding one moment, well, many, but in this case, let's focus on one. There came a moment in Watergate when the Wall Street banking establishment, those masters of human destiny who have largely influenced, sometimes dictated, always influenced, and always tried to influence the political direction of the U.S. and the personnel choices in particular. They had to decide at some moment that Nixon had to go, that they wanted to dump Nixon. And actually, you have the side that involves Congress. You have the side of the thing that involves the media. Public opinion, of course, a very big role. Those are all important, and we're not suggesting for a moment that those weren't important to decisive, because they were. But there's another one that's important and decisive. It's what is the view by the zombie bankers of the day, the hedge fund hyenas, a little bit less important, but they were there too. And when did they decide that Nixon had become, that he had outlived his usefulness and had become an encumbrance, that he had become a useless feature? I would guess, well, it's hard to say, right, because the researchers, the establishment professors and so forth are not allowed to ask these questions. You can see very easily that forces in the CIA, that is the obvious people, right, McCord and Howard Hunt and that whole faction of the CIA, the Cold War CIA, played a big role. But that begs the question, because those people are not free agents, right? They are the so-called bankers CIA, the faction of the CIA that's closer than the other one. They're all close, but this one is the closest to Wall Street and their interests. So that was the reality then. So normally for these people who write about Watergate and so forth, once they get to the CIA or something, if they get that far, which is rare, that's already a big leap for them, and they don't want to know who tells the CIA what to do, really. So that's exactly what we have to do, and our finding, of course, is that there is this big, important CIA faction, otherwise known as the bankers CIA, and similarly in all the rest of the intelligence community. Now, these considerations are heretical, because we're supposed to have the era of good feelings in regard to the intelligence community helping us to get rid of Trump. And to the extent that they do that, we are, sincerely, we are. We're full of gratitude and recognizing this important public service, right? That's patriotism. It is. But now we also want to see what's going on, right? So the basic finding is what we're going to tell you now in the second segment here on World Crisis Radio. This is our post-Thanksgiving weekend program, and we're hoping that you all had a great Thanksgiving, and that you'll come out of this weekend refreshed and ready for the big political battles that lie ahead. But what we're trying to point out now is something big has changed. There has been a shift, we believe, in the attitude of the ruling elite, that is the Wall Street finance oligarchs, the Wall Street financiers, zombie bankers, and so forth. This is the locus of very considerable power, not total power, but very considerable. And it looks to us like they have gone through a bit of a phase change, and we're going to try to flesh that out a little bit. So, with Nixon, there's some moment in 72, 73, 74 where the consensus emerges on Wall Street that Nixon has to go, that they don't want him in there anymore, and they'd be happy to have a nonentity from the Republicans in Congress. Don't look now. Jerry Ford, then Pence now, quite possible, or maybe Pence is going to play the role of Agnew, right? We've been talking about Agnew for a year. Maddow acts as if she has somehow discovered this with her podcast. No, we have been acutely aware, and what she doesn't seem to get is that Agnew was indicted. He was indicted. And if the vice president can be indicted, this goes a far piece towards showing that the president can also be indicted. But here's the idea. At a certain point, Wall Street has got to say, all right, we're fed up. In this particular case, is to say, look, this clown, this buffoon, our puppet, has given us a reactionary judge who's going to vote. He's given us 2 reactionary judges, and they're going to vote for the wealthy. They're going to vote for deregulation. They're going to be in favor of the moneyed power up and down the line. And then they'll do all this social stuff that we don't care about, right? They don't care about abortion one way or the other. They can fly to Switzerland. But for of course, the rubes, right? The rubes in the Republican base, that is very important. Now, they're essentially saying that they're looking at Trump, a discredited buffoon, a puppet, and they're not happy. And as in the case of Nixon, it has a lot to do with economics. Now, we hope that you can go to tarpley.net, go to americansystem.tv. You can, even for those of you who are not yet subscribers to my daily program, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you can read the headlines and get the idea. And then I hope you're going to subscribe, because that's what you should do. Give yourself a Christmas present, right? Advent is coming. Get yourself a Christmas present. But the idea is, economically, it's not going well, right? The tax cut is now about a year old. The full effects have not been felt, but the effects of this tax cut have been pre-discounted in the markets, and it has proven to be not enough. So we are now in a downward phase, right? We are in the descending node of the Trump economy. The Trump bubble in stocks has been collapsing since October, and there's also what has now become, in effect, the Trump bond bubble, that huge mass of junk bond debt and quasi-junk bond debt, which has been built up. Remember, some of this junk bond stuff was $1.5 trillion back in 2009, and it has now become $3 trillion. And we've got all kinds of masses of triple B, triple C, and even worse, junk. All of that is now in trouble, partly because of the rising interest rates, the competition for returns, and for other reasons. And we look at Trump, the discredited buffoon and puppet. And what does he do? He comes out and babbles about how this is all the fault of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve did it, he says, and they should be lowering interest rates instead of raising them. Now, this is a utopian statement, right? The other parts of the economic community, economist community, are trying to say, if you don't have interest rates up to 2 or 3%, then you can't do any cutting when things get really bad. And that's apparently the predicament of Europe, right? They're more or less in that situation. So some of these characters today are gloating that the Europeans won't have any way to stimulate. Actually, parenthesis, we know what they can do. They can do a credit stimulus That would be the equivalent of the $5 trillion from the Federal Reserve going out at 0% and used to buy bonds from states, counties, cities, authorities, and those are people who want to have infrastructure projects. The Federal Reserve makes a tender offer, and there's your stimulus. You've always got that. 100-year bonds, right? Pay it off at 1% a year. Easily done. But right now, things look a little bit grim. There are lots and lots of negative signs. We've been cataloging them day by day. So now the question is, are they so fed up with Donald J. Trump that they've decided to turn against him, that they've decided to deploy their considerable resources? They're puppets in the Congress. They're puppets on the Supreme Court. They're puppets in the media, obviously. The media is actually where you can begin to get inklings of what is happening, right? We've been pointing to the fact that before this election, the corporate media of the United States had gone into a sharp right turn, that they had essentially decided, their bosses had decided, that they did not want the Democratic blue wave. They tried to undercut it, right? Symbolic. Jake Tapper on the night of the election, there is no blue wave, said old Jake, right? He's probably getting that from Zucker at CNN and at MSNBC, not so marked, but still there. And that was this no-talent Andy Lackluster, the head of the NBC News division. So they were saying, let's not have a blue wave, in effect, because if we have a big blue wave and the Democrats take the Senate too, then they're going to roll back some of our beloved tax cuts if they can. And they don't want that. These corporations want the Trump tax scam, GOP tax scam. But now, after the election, you see that the conditions are deteriorating, and therefore Wall Street has to consider, what do you do next after your pre-election right turn? What do you do now? And we'll tell you this in just a minute, I promise. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So now, what we seem to have is a situation where the Wall Street people have decided that Trump has come to the end of his usefulness and that he has strutted and fretted his wretched hour upon the stage. He's given them these tax cuts. He's put a laissez-faire duo, Gorsuch and now Kavanaugh. They're on the Supreme Court. So what else are you going to get from this guy? At what point is he more trouble than he's worth? In particular, his tendencies to sell out and appease to these foreign powers. Sometimes that gets in the way of what Wall Street wants. But above all, Trump's incompetence in economic management and this crew of grifters that he's got with them, right? People like Mnuchin, oh my heavens, and Lighthizer, maybe a little bit less blatant, but still no bargain. So here's what we have. Take a look at the New York Times, dated today, dated yesterday. Well, it comes out in the printed version, I think, today. And the article is by Michael Schmidt, who is a complacent and rather self-important chronicler, and Maggie Haberman, who lives by the doctrine of access. Now, they've made important contributions, don't get me wrong, but these are these people, right? They are not part of any resistance. As a matter of fact, Schmidt, interviewed at one point by Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. Woodward asked him, Schmidt, do you think of yourself as being part of a resistance? No, says Schmidt. And he's not. And but here's the irony now. He's doing something which is going to be quite ominous for Trump. So here's the idea. The headline, Trump wanted to order Justice Department to prosecute Comey and Clinton. Now, with this, I urge you to think about it in two ways. This is the flagship of the banking establishment. That is what the New York Times is. It has been. It is. The flagship of the banking establishment, they've kept up a pretty decent fire on Trump and his people. They're obviously critical. However, at key moments like October 31st, 2016, article signed by Lichtblau, the FBI says there's no connection between Trump and Russia. Remember that one? Or in 2015, Hillary Clinton's emails are the great issue of our time. And then continuing with that. So the general idea is a context of critical sniping at people like Trump. But then, in terms of the really deeper strategic issues, the New York Times has done yeoman's service for Trump. But now, is that changing? And my point here is it may be. So here we go. That's the article, right? Trump wanted to order Justice Department to prosecute Comey and Clinton by Schmidt and Haberman. And here's your opening. President Trump told the White House counsel, McGahn, in the spring of 2018 that he wanted to order the Justice Department to prosecute, to arrest, to indict two of his political adversaries, his 2016 challenger Hillary Clinton and the former FBI Director James Comey, according to two people familiar with the conversation. So two sources. The lawyer, Don McGahn, said no to the president. He said, I don't have the authority to do that. McGahn said, I could order it, I could request an investigation, but that could prompt accusations of abuse of power. And to make his point, McGahn told White House lawyers, write me a memo for Trump that explains if he asks these law enforcement agencies to probe political adversaries and rivals, he could face dire consequences, including possible impeachment. Now, I have to point out, we already knew that Trump had demanded from McGahn in 2017, as I recall, that he should go and fire Bob Mueller, the special counsel. This is a little bit different. Now, this is Trump attempting to tell McGahn, we want to get Clinton and Comey indicted. And I think you might see that this is for people who are not in this administration and people who are mainly concerned with themselves, this is a more serious thing. In other words, every oligarch in Wall Street could look at this and say, if Trump can get Hillary Clinton indicted and if he can get Comey indicted, in other words, somebody who represents a network in the Democratic Party with fundraising and so forth, international too, and Comey with his network inside the FBI and the intelligence community, hey, if he can do that indicting, that it could be me too, right? Say people in the boardrooms of Wall Street, right? The zombie bankers. So I urge you, look at this article. I think it's a kind of a landmark. I think it may be a turning point. The idea being that what it says is important, right? It's certainly it's a very serious matter. This is maybe the one that's most obviously impeachable. This is abuse of power in the naked form, right? This is a very extreme thing that Trump has been doing, according to the article. He's not happy with Christopher Wray, the FBI director. He wants him to be more active. He's too weak. And the question then is, what's with this article? And here's the idea. Apart from the content of the article, just the fact that this appears here in the Washington Post, New York Times, at this point, seems to indicate that this is a signal piece. In other words, what it says is very important. But perhaps more, even more overarching, is this point that it seems to be a communication to large portions of the financier oligarchy and their hangers-on, right, their clients, other journalists, right? It is, as we say, the flagship of the banking establishment in terms of print media, The New York Times always tremendous influence over what's on cable television, what's on network news, other newspapers. Some of the other newspapers they print it because they're part of the New York Times service. And I would suggest now, as a working hypothesis, right, with all the qualifiers you want, and I do want them, this to me seems like a signal saying, all right, that's it. We've had it with Trump. Let's get busy now, dear fellow finance oligarchs. Let's get busy ushering him off the stage because he is now becoming antithetical to our interests and our program. Right? In other words, we've gotten out of Trump what we can hope to get, the tax cut, the 2 reactionary or fascist judges, and from now on, he's a losing proposition because the cost of propping him up is now beginning to exceed the benefits that one can hope to derive. And of course, this has everything to do with the blue wave. Yes, there was a blue wave on November 6th, in spite of the ravings of Jake Tapper, Carville, Van Jones, and other weaklings or persons of little faith or individuals of little will. There was a blue wave, and that plays a role. Right? The public opinion, obviously, Wall Street cannot be completely indifferent. So I would say this is an ominous signal piece, and it's signaling dump Trump. And we'll be back in a minute on Gold Prices. This is Webster Coffee here in Washington, D.C. We want to urge you to visit AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. You're getting analysis here you're not going to get anywhere else, believe me, and it's worth having. And for a tiny token fee, you can get this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at about 9 o'clock. Our show goes up, and you're going to keep up with this stuff. And in particular, the important things that have happened, but then what does it mean? Where are we? So this notion that you can tell the Justice Department to essentially jail your enemies, it's a bridge too far, but maybe this is how the oligarchs see it concerning themselves, right? There must be people in Wall Street who say, hey, I've crossed Trump a number of times. Maybe he'll, once he gets into ordering indictments, maybe he'll order me indicted, and I don't want that. So let's start weakening him at the very least, and maybe we'll usher him out before he knows it. The areas, again, are puppets in the media, puppets in the Supreme Court. If you see the Supreme Court making surprise decisions that are not so good for Trump, this would be support for this hypothesis. Puppets in the Congress are maybe the most obvious. You got to look at somebody like Lindsey Graham, right, a resident big mouth of the Senate. And what's he doing? Is he running interference for Trump, or is he doing things that make Trump's life a little bit more difficult? Now, I got to fill in a couple of things. Go back about 2 weeks to that statement by Peter Navarro, where he told a reporter, whatever it is, got himself into print, saying that Goldman Sachs and other Wall Street globalists have been meddling in the Trump administration negotiations with Beijing, China, with the Xi dynasty. And there, the point was, he said, you guys are you're acting as unpaid agents of Beijing. In other words, traitors, I guess, if the shoe fits. And he mentioned Goldman Sachs. Now, this is precisely, where, right? You look at Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan. You look at the new leaders now at Goldman Sachs. And similarly, these are the people who might decide that they've had it with Don and the Don show, that it's too much. These are people who obviously their preference is for free trade, because they don't care about industrial survival of the United States. They're concerned about the looting rate on various forms of investment. Right? This is purely financial speculation. And the degree to which this pull of Trump's very base is pulling in the direction of some kind of protectionism, they fundamentally don't like that. They allow it to go on in the short run, but then it gets to be a problem. Now, we have a totally different attitude, right? We're neither one nor the other. We say protectionism, yes, but done in a competent way, which is the opposite of what Trump is doing. And obviously, there's got to be a worldwide coalition, and there's got to be a target, right? There's got to be a goal that you're trying to do, and it can't be the political ascendancy of one demagogue, right? That's no good. So anyway, when we saw that Peter Navarro statement attacking Goldman Sachs and other Wall Street globalists for meddling as unpaid agents of China in the negotiations with Beijing, that's where you had to start wondering, what is going on here? Another one to wonder about is this Khashoggi, used to be Adnan, now it's, was his nephew, I guess. Khashoggi, why has Wall Street and their media chosen to make this such a big issue? We knew that the Saudi government were a bunch of butchers. We knew that they were waging a genocidal war in Yemen and cajoling the U.S. to allow that to happen logistically. If you want to know the contempt for humanity that's held in the Saudi regime, go to Saudi Arabia. Any given day, any given week, you find public executions, hangings, beheadings, the stoning of women, on and on. We had him Mohammed bin Salman arrested the whole existing leadership of the country and imprisoned them in this hotel. And some of them fared very poorly. And then, most egregious, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, as General Aoun, President Aoun of Lebanon pointed out, because he was fighting on the other end. This was unprecedented, violates all the customs and norms of centuries of diplomacy. So you knew what MBS was, and you knew what Saudi Arabia was, and you've been able to swallow that for decades. And I'm not recommending any particular course of action, but what I am noting is this rather puzzling holier-than-thou stuff now from the establishment media, right? That somehow this is disgusting. And, of course, it is disgusting, right, to see Trump grovel for Saudi Arabia. He doesn't need to do that, but he wants to do it. And it's clear that he's making money somehow off of this, right? Not so difficult to see. So that's another factor. And what we're going to be doing is looking at other such factors. But now, the two things. Trump's popularity has cratered. He can't win re-election. Pennsylvania has turned against him in depth. Michigan has turned against him in depth. And Wisconsin has turned against him in depth. You got two reactionary Republican governors, Scott of Wisconsin and the infamous Snyder of Flint water pollution fame. They are gone, and now you have Democratic governors, and they will hopefully have the good sense to make sure that the playing field is tilted back towards obviously towards fairness, certainly, right? But also cumulative historical fairness, right? That they've been tilting towards the Republicans since 2010. So you can't just correct that and then say, okay, we're even. We're not even. So all of that. And, of course, as Chris Wallace even pointed out, Trump, without those three states, you can't win re-election. Don't tell us about Ohio. You had Ohio in your pocket. Florida you're supposed to have. You had to fight like crazy to get through in Florida, right, with vote fraud and every other thing. Well, I think now this is a signal that they're not interested in getting Trump reelected. Now, what does that mean? These forces in Wall Street and that can now be relied upon to look into the Democratic Party and attempt to find new puppets. New puppets. And the more demagogic, the more aspirational, the more utopian, the more out of the ordinary, the better. The more they appear as unexpected candidates, dark horses, and there's a huge cloud now of about 30 candidates, we're told, or potential candidates who are now jockeying for staff, for donors, for contributions, endorsements, and all of this. Right? This is ongoing right now. So you get the idea that the gravitational pull of that activity is pulling many of the financier oligarchs into this new mentality of, well, that was Trump, finish, now we got to think. Thanksgiving weekend of 2018. Second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is our Thanksgiving weekend show, post-Thanksgiving. We're actually recording a little bit before the holiday. Looking at the markets today, I think what we've got is a modest short-covering rally, a relief rally. Obviously helped along by the plunge protection team, obviously helped along by the fact that many traders didn't even come in today, and those who did are probably leaving their desks early. And therefore, if we look here at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday, right, 3 hours to the close, you never know, but you've got the Dow Jones up 176 points. This is a fraction of the 1,000 points that were lost on Monday and Tuesday on the Dow, and similar things. We'll give you a quick summary of the financial carnage, the American carnage that we detailed it in our program of Tuesday, November 20th, if you want to take a look at that on theamericans.tv. The oil price has bounced back a little bit, 55.38, West Texas Intermediate. But, of course, that's still depressed, and there is a worldwide economic contraction, a worldwide economic slowdown. Now, just in terms of this thing about ruling class opinion, the ruling class is aware of a $9 trillion debt bubble accumulated under Trump. It's on his watch now. He's been there for 2 years. Going to take responsibility for something, whether you like it or not. Get the first time in your life you've ever taken responsibility for anything. Obviously, he will try to evade and pass the buck passer of Pennsylvania Avenue. But there's a $9 trillion corporate debt bomb. A lot of it is junk, and that is one of the things these people are considering. Now, you have to remember, when Wall Street looks ahead, they're always looking at the question, who can we get as president that will impose austerity on working people so that there'll be enough loot to make sure that the concessions pie is replenished for us financier oligarchs. And for a while, that was Trump, right? Trump was their clown prince. He was their demagogue, and he delivered these very tangible things. But I think the impression is that they think they've gotten what they're going to get, and now they have to look ahead. And they don't want to foreclose other options by seeming to support Trump in his descending node. So yes, there was a mild relief on Wall Street on Wednesday, at least up to the point. We've got another ways to go with the show, of course, so we'll check in again towards the end of the day. But now just a couple of other things. If you look at CNBC, right, the business channel, the Wall Street channel, they have a group of CFOs, Chief Financial Officers. There's something called the CNBC Global CFO Council. And these people, this includes U.S. and abroad, right? This is not just U.S. This is globalized, yeah, which is where these decisions are, to some extent, they're made. They believe that the Dow is going to dive another 2,000 points. 8% more on the downside. They're being very nice to themselves. They are, above all, concerned about trade war with China. 75% of them say that's the big problem that they see. These characters manage $5 trillion in market value, according to CNBC. Obviously, you don't know who they are. And 13%, 1-3, think that the market will reach a new record before another major drop. So they are bearish. That is a change. They are noticing that the FAANG, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, alias Alphabet, are all in bear markets. And in particular, Facebook down, 30-35%. Goldman Sachs said on Monday that the U.S. economic growth will be cut in half by the end of 2019. The sugar high, the adrenaline shot coming from the Republican tax scam, the share buybacks in particular, which is where that money went, that will then wear off, and it's going to be trade. Interestingly, what do the CFOs, the chief financial officers, think of the Trump team? In particular, Peter Navarro and Robert Lighthizer, considered the hardliners on trade. They have the lowest approval ratings. They're at about 27%, so they're even lower than Trump. They're practically as low as Congress. And, of course, we've had all sorts of people warning that there's a recession. Recession, to put it mildly. We had Kramer saying if the Fed raises rates in December, you'll wish you had sold before Thanksgiving. We had Sam Stovall. We have J.P. Morgan saying that it's going to come in at less than 2%. Goldman Sachs, similar. Goldman Sachs says the only asset you want to have now is cash. Not stocks, not bonds, not even real, cash, just cash. Cash is king. Cash is king is another way to say bear market. Down, down, dive. So these CFOs don't particularly like Pence. He thinks he's running for office with that. And they don't have confidence in Trump. There's another one of these categories, which I was trying to find for you, where you see that they say that they have more confidence in some of Trump's opponents than they do in the tenant of the Oval Office himself. So this is it. Put together a grim economic financial perspective above all. A Trump stock bubble which is deflating, and a Trump corporate debt bubble, since they have to, of course, it's made more acute because they have to compete with the Treasury for big borrowings, right? About $1 trillion increased borrowing because of the Republican tax scam. You put all this together, and then you look at them, and you say, on the day that we had, who did we have? J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Larry Summers, in effect, in a week or so, saying there's going to be a recession now. Who do they send out? Kudlow, the babbling propagandist, and he's out there to say, no, it's all hunky-dory, and then they send out Trump to say it's the fault of the Fed. They should lower interest rates and not raise them. I think you get the idea that where big money is at stake, this clowning, this constant playing to these backward base individuals, that's not what Wall Street expects. And above all, the results are no good. So therefore, our headline of yesterday, or of Tuesday, Trump for sale cheap. Trump is, according to this famous New York Times article, he's trying to get the Department of Justice to go all the way back to Uranium One to investigate how this was allowed. He's getting advice from Judge Janine Pirro. He's getting advice from Hannity. He's getting advice from the gutter snipes and the scurrilous ideologues of the world. So what we have with this article is a pretty good prima facie case of obstruction, abuse of power, the classic items in bill of impeachment. So we'll be back in a minute here on World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. on the eve of Thanksgiving, but you're hearing us on the Thanksgiving post-Thanksgiving weekend. Best wishes all around. Now, let's just sum up some of the other things that go into this moment, right? Because it seems like for about 2 years it's been one drip or one brick after another. When does quantity turn into quality? When does Wall Street decide to cut their losses on this particular populist experiment, right? Because it was designed to serve financier interests, and once it doesn't, then you'll see that it doesn't. It gets very grim for the boss tweet. So now the stock market, okay, and the related crisis. Here's what we can sum up, and people should be aware of this. We've just had, on Monday and Tuesday, a loss of 1,000 Dow points in 2 days, and then this short covering rally for whatever this is worth, not a lot. There is no bottom. There is no bounce. The best they can manage is a dead cat bounce. So it's headed down, and many of these pundits are now pointing in that direction. The ones who had told us that rising prices would be eternal back in June, July, August, now it looks different. So as a result of Monday and Tuesday action, the market gains in the Dow and the Standard & Poor's 500 were wiped out. So the entire labor of speculation, stock jobbing, and related exertions for the entirety of 2018 is gone into the garbage can of history. Those were paper profits. You can console yourself. Those were paper profits. But maybe it would have been good to get out at a certain point in September or early October. But, of course, you know the old saying, bears make money, bulls make money, pigs get slaughtered. If you're trying to get the last 100 points on the Dow in terms of a bubble, then that's a very, very dangerous game and hard to succeed with timing down to that level, which involves days or even hours. So no market gains for 2018. So the entire second year of the Trump populist revolution, gone. Then the Faang, as we've said, or Famang, if you put Microsoft in the middle, it's easier to be understood. But Faang, without Microsoft, they have now racked up $1 trillion in losses. It's like saying Apple or Amazon, at the height of the bubble back in August, September, October, reached about $1 trillion each in value. So it's like having one of the top Faang components wiped out. $1 trillion. So $1 trillion in hot money has ceased to exist, and the Federal Reserve, with its quantitative tightening, continues in subtracting about $50 billion per month, right? So $600 million per year. without anything else happening. We had oil break through down to about $54 per barrel. This points towards a world economic contraction. And indeed, the GDP figures published for Germany and Japan show a decline, therefore a contraction, negative growth. That means a contraction. In the case of Italy, it's flat, but I think we can be relatively confident that Italy is also headed downwards because of its debt crisis, where you have the government begging the citizens to go out and buy treasury securities, right? Treasury notes, treasury bills, as a means of saving. And then we have a little bit of color, right? The death cross. The death cross is this chart phenomenon when the 50-day moving average goes below the 200-day moving average, right? The DMA. Well, the 50-day DMA has gone below the 200 DMA for Facebook, Google, and Netflix. And, of course, on Monday and Tuesday, big trouble for Apple and for Goldman Sachs. Big losses. So, in the face of this, Kudlow is promising happy days, and Trump is blaming it on the Federal Reserve. Now, one interesting point, a number of people pointed out that in Europe, the interest rates are even lower, right? The German interest rate is, 0.5% on some of these bonds. What are they going to do when the recession starts? How will they stimulate? Well, we know how you can stimulate. You stimulate with a credit stimulus. You force the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Japan, and the European Central Bank to say, okay, we're opening up a special economic recovery window, and if you want to build infrastructure or build a factory or other things, come to us, bring us the bonds, 0% 100-year bonds, and we will buy them to a total of $5 trillion for each of those, right? So maybe $15 trillion. And with that, you're going to rebuild the infrastructure of the free world, I guess we have to say. Not Russia, not China. And that's a stimulus, a credit stimulus, right? This is what was done for AIG through the so-called Maiden Lane entities down there in Lower Manhattan. This is now using that same credit-creating power to generate jobs, infrastructure, real, tangible, physical, commodity-based growth. And that's going to be one of our great themes for 2019. So soon, as we wrote the other day, the only available stimulus for some parts of the world may be the Tax Wall Street Party proposal for a 0% credit stimulus requisitioned, commandeered from the central bank, saying, forget about your banks, right, your clients. You think you're going to have to serve the entire economy. You've got to think about not just price stability and some passing attention to unemployment, but now infrastructure, jobs, growth are your responsibility, not just this monetarist stuff. All right, so that's that. Now, the Republican Party, we want to stress again, there was a blue wave. Jake Tapper was wrong. Carville was wrong. Van Jones was wrong. CNN, obviously very unreliable here. And we'll get the dimensions of the Republican debacle here in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So the financial picture bad. And again, up to now, the stock market crash has held center stage. It's going to be pushed aside a little bit, maybe more, maybe less, by the bond bubble, corporate bond bubble, junk bond bubble, fixed income. That's what they're going to be talking about, made worse by the fact that the federal borrowing requirement has gone sky high because of the Republican tax scam, which was all to benefit the super-duper rich. Not even the rich, not even the super rich, but the super-duper rich, right? The 0.01% or something like that that are the main beneficiaries. And, of course, a lot of the losses, we'll get to these losses now, it has to do with the Republicans abolishing the state and local tax deductibility. That's now severely limited, so that it's a tax increase for much of the middle class and upper middle class in those New Jersey suburbs, those California suburbs, and elsewhere. So it's, yes, the college-educated white women in the suburbs are horrified by Trump, absolutely, but then there's also the fact that they're horrified by the fact that they're taking a hit, they're taking a tax increase to finance the demands of the Koch brothers, the Adelsons, the rest of them, right? The super rich mega donor class of the Republican Party in particular, but not only, because it extends into the Democrats as well. Now, in terms of we probably just ought to say a couple of words about the Trumpgate, Russiagate. This Whitaker, he's getting slammed. Here we go with the Washington Post of today, Wednesday. Whitaker had a big payday at a nonprofit for 3 years after he arrived in Washington in 2014. Whitaker received $1.2 million as the leader of a nonprofit group that reported no other employees, and that was some of the best earnings that he had done in his career. This is called the Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust. It's supposedly a watchdog nonprofit to expose unethical conduct by public officials. They should have bought a mirror. It became a lucrative stepping stone from a modest law practice in Iowa to now being the acting attorney general. And again, acting, he's going to have to do some real acting, the Stanislavski method of acting, right? Imagine not that you're a light bulb, but that you're the attorney general, because that's the only way that you're ever going to get there. So a lot of money coming in. What was that? Quite fishy. And now we've got a couple of things going on the Mueller front, right? We were all hoping that Mueller would act last Friday, that he'd act before Thanksgiving. He could still act on Black Friday. That's not a holiday. He could act on Black Friday, and otherwise into the following week. But there has been this back and forth, right? This thing about the sealed motions, the sealed documents going back and forth between Mueller, we think, and the District of Columbia District and the D.C. Circuit Court going back and forth. It is now widely suspected that this is, in fact, a subpoena for Trump, possibly documents, but more likely answer questions, be grilled, get grilled. Now, again, what I'm saying about the ruling elite, if they have made this decision, you can expect that to be reflected, at least to some extent, in the opinions of these judges, who are not the paragons of virtue that are sometimes portrayed on cable television, even by people who are anti-Trump. So there's that. Trump says that he has provided written answers to written questions, not about obstruction, but only about Russia. Well, we'll be looking for that. And we have these very interesting reports. Take a look, as always, at Webster G. Tarpley Twitter, because there you're going to find the story. Scroll down until you find it, that there are about 36, quite possibly 36, give or take, 36 plus, sealed indictments. This is from studying that docket of the D.C. District Court. There are now about 36 sealed indictments, and nobody knows what they are, except that the usual figure is 5 to 10, and now it's up to 3 times that at least. And one wonders what that is involved, what is involved with that. That could be, as we've argued, the doomsday machine, right? Saying, okay, you want to fire me? You want to do a Saturday Night Massacre or something like that? Well, those 36 sealed indictments will then be opened, and you will rue the day, because you will find that you would have been better leaving well enough alone. So this is all very, very active, and we're looking for it. Senator Schumer says that he wants an investigation of Trump's communications with Whitaker, meetings and other communications. Now again, Schumer, watch Schumer. If there's a voice of Wall Street in the Democratic caucus, it has to be Chuck Schumer. So I think, again, look for expressions of being fed up with Trump and not caring if Trump departs from the scene even early. All right, so that's going on now. The Democrats in this blue wave are up to 40 seats, according to at least one source, and there are still a number of seats left to be decided. So it's a blue wave. Remember, I predicted 42. It's still mathematically possible that my prediction will come true. I hope it does. So that would make 40. Again, it looks like the Republicans have gained 2 in the Senate. They already had the Senate. So this is quantity, not quality. The qualitative change is taking over the House of Representatives, and then you can subpoena, you can investigate, you can probe, hold public hearings, get on TV, stir the pot, and that's what they've got to do. And I think they know this. Nadler, a veteran, let's see how well he does. We're rooting for him, obviously, and for Schumer, for that matter, as long as it's got to do with this question of Trump. So the other thing is the long-term issue, the disappearance, the extinction of the Republican Party. Let's look at 3 regions. We're going to look at New England. We're going to look at the Mid-Atlantic and the person of New Jersey and California. Let's start with California. California had a blue tsunami. Go to Orange County, the original Goldwater country of 63, 64. The Reagan country shortly thereafter. All House seats in Orange County have now been lost by the Republicans and gained by the Democrats. The Republicans were able to put up a candidate for governor. He was able to get through the jungle primary. This is this guy Cox. But with unbelievable stupidity, ineptitude, he ran on the Trump anti-immigration wall in a state where the so-called white population, according to these race scientists, is 40%. All of those Hispanics were offended, and he lost big to Gavin Newsom. And we're looking to Gavin Newsom as a possible renovator of the Democratic Party. We'll have a couple of more things about this in just a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Sue Radio, Upstairs Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., recording on the eve of Thanksgiving so you can hear it on the post-Thanksgiving weekend and focusing, therefore, on the longer-term phenomena. California had a blue tsunami. The former leader of the California State Assembly says that the California Republican Party is dead and not salvageable because of Trump's toxic national brand. I'm sure that's convenient. I'm sure there are intrinsic factors that have played a role, but generally speaking, this is correct. In San Diego, the Republican mayor says you can go to the zoo and see animals, and then you can come to City Hall and see Republicans who might become extinct in the state very soon. We hope so. 24% of California voters are now registered Republicans, according to Dari Sregow, someone that I know from junior high school back in Flushing, Queens in the early 1960s. So congratulations to him at being quoted in Politico. He seems to convey the idea that a total disintegration of the Republican Party in California is quite possible if the current policies are maintained. In terms of New England, all those states, right? Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, 6 states, 6 states, 1/8 almost of the Union. In all of that area, from Maine down to the New York border, there's count of one Republican elected official in House or Senate. It is Susan Collins, the liberal Republican snake, and we're hoping that her treacherous role in putting the dipsomaniac Kavanaugh into the Supreme Court, her betrayal, we're hoping that that will then lead to Wide Awake forces. Wide Awake was the group that supported Lincoln in 1860. Wide Awake, the Wide Awake movement. They should usher her out so she can spend more time with her family, and that will then lead the total extinction of the Republican Party for House and Senate in New England. In the state of New Jersey, right, which was once full of, it's like a larger version of Staten Island, people moving out of the city into the suburbs, getting a little bit of money and going, making a sharp right turn. Well, in all of New Jersey, there's now just one Republican member of Congress, House or Senate, and that is Chris Smith from somewhere in northern New Jersey, maybe Morristown, I'm guessing. So look at this. Now, the other one we ought to point to, just briefly, we are following the Brexit. We haven't been able to do as much of that because also things are waiting. There's a meeting now of the 27 member states of the European Union, and they are going to vote, do they approve of the Brexit exit deal, right, the divorce settlement between the European Union and the May government. There have been some indications that the government of Spain may say, no, we're not going to let this happen because we want Gibraltar back. This has been now since the War of the Spanish Succession at the beginning of the 1700s that the British have been occupying Gibraltar, right? They stole it. This was never agreed to. Under the UN system, this is illegal annexation of conquered territory. So we'll be watching that one. In the meantime, we've got sniping going back and forth. May is under constant attack. She had to do her prime minister's question time here on Wednesday morning, and this, a chorus of sharp critique. It is generally agreed that the Leave campaign, the promise, the pie in the sky, was delusional, that you'd get control of your borders, your laws, and your money, and wouldn't that be great? And instead, it's blood, sweat, and tears. I wanted to read you, I urge you to go and take a look. Go take a look in my book, Surviving the Cataclysm, a life-changing book to read. In 1973, at the same time that Nixon was on his way out, there was this Arab oil boycott, which was, of course, cynically arranged with the help of various bankers and State Department people. Sometimes the Salzburg meeting of the Trilateral, or was it the Bilderberger Group, is indicated in a place where this line was put out. But what was found was that Nixon was, as a result of the economic dislocations. Nixon had to go through August 15th, 1971. He destroyed the world monetary system, and then in order to suck up the various dollars floating around the world to prevent a dollar crash, they then said, all right, we're going to raise the price of oil by 400%. That's what the Arab oil boycott was. Those petrodollars were then recycled into Chase Manhattan Bank, J.P. Morgan today. So that was what was happening then. In Britain, this hit very, very hard. The Prime Minister was Ted Heath, kind of a liberal, moderate Tory, moderate conservative, And things got so bad that he put Britain on the 3-day week. You can read a very interesting account by Ambrose Evans Pritchard, the correspondent, who says what it was like to be in, private school, we would say. Public school is what they call it, but it's private. It's a private school, and they were sitting there in the cold, right? They were essentially in the cold and in the dark because the electricity didn't go. This is the kind of world that you're going to get if you go into Brexit. So it's extreme austerity. The people voted for a fantasy. You cannot have your cake and eat it too, but this is what Boris Johnson, Farage has now peeled off, right? He's no longer for it. Take a look at Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed on that one. So it was built on racism and xenophobia. The Brexit saga is you can let racism and xenophobia run wild, but then you're going to pay the piper, and the piper are these tremendous sacrifices. So we're now in the midst of the biggest political crisis in Britain since World War II. And again, the obvious thing is, it's one thing to say, I want to buy a car, general statement. That was the 2016 referendum, right, based on pie in the sky. Now, there's a concrete deal, and it could get worse. If there's no deal, it's even worse. So now, a second referendum, a people's vote, the thing that May fears the most, because she knows she's going to lose it. And she's the servant of these adventurers, right, the extremists of the City of London. The extreme Perfide Albion party are there saying, we want to become the bankers of China. We're going to dump Europe. Obviously, we're going to exploit them, loot them as much as we can. The Americans, the dumb Americans, will protect us, and we're going to be working for China. We're going to be a Trojan horse. De Gaulle was right. They are a Trojan horse, these City of London extremists. So they took over, and they want to push it through. And May is now their tool. Well, no. There is no majority for Brexit in any form. There is no majority. It just cannot be done. So we want to compliment the people in Britain, right, the honest Englishmen, Scots, Welsh, and others. Make sure you stop it. No Brexit. And we had some other topics, but join us during the week at AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv, and continuing and belated Happy Thanksgiving to all.